Welcome, everyone. This is Dr. Mercola, and today we're here with Mark Kastel, who is the founder of Cornucopia, which is a really highly effective consumer advocacy for making sure that we have high quality foods and people aren't trying to deceive us in this area. And he's here today to talk to us about Agent Orange, which is I'm sure many of you heard about, leftover from Vietnam days, and they're trying to creep it into our food supply. So, welcome, Mark. Why don't you
Thank you.
mention what Cornucopia is, and then how you got involved with this specific project on Agent Orange?
Sure. Well, Cornucopia is a farm policy research group. We're based in Cornucopia, Wisconsin, and our mission is empowering farmers and especially consumers and wholesale buyers with the information so they can make good, discerning purchasing decisions in the marketplace. Among other things, we act as an organic industry watchdog to make sure to preserve the integrity and authenticity of the organic label and products, to make sure that it remains to be a true marketplace alternative for people who want safer and more nutritious food.
Great. So it's a great resource, and if this is interesting to anyone, and they align with these goals, and I would certainly recommend supporting them. They do a phenomenal job and work, and they rely on support from consumers like us. So, what happened with this Agent Orange? Can you describe that in more detail and what's going on with it?
Sure. You might say that Agent Orange, the introduction actually to one of the active ingredients in Agent Orange, 2,4-D, a herbicide, is coming to market in a popularized form because of the failure of Monsanto's Roundup Ready corn varieties. And when I say failure, it means that when they first introduced corn that would be resistant to the herbicide glyphosate, which is the generic term for Roundup, it wasn't a question of when, it was a question of how soon, not if, these weeds would develop resistance and render the herbicide ineffective. Well, it happened pretty darn quick. The herbicide would usually kill the corn, but they genetically modified its genetic makeup so that it would resist this chemical. And what we've seen is exponential increases in the use of glyphosate.
Well, actually, if the glyphosate is used on not just corn products, isn't it used on most all the genetically modified or engineered plants?
Well, there are genetic engineered...
Soy especially.
Yes, there are genetic engineered traits other than herbicide resistance. But right now, the commercialized varieties that are herbicide resistant are resistant to Roundup. And I say now Roundup instead of the generic term because it's a patented life form, these genetic mutations of the corn plant and the soya plant. And if you use these resistant genetic mutated crops, you have to, as part of the technology agreement, the licensing agreement, buy your herbicides from Monsanto at probably inflated prices. So it's a juggernaut of sorts. So we're not just talking about buying the seed from Monsanto. We're talking about being locked into buying your farm chemicals. And so Agent Orange, which was a herbicide that was used to defoliate the jungles in Vietnam and Southeast Asia, which also included a myriad of other incredibly toxic chemicals, which we know had profound deleterious effect on the health of the indigenous peoples who lived in Southeast Asia and our veterans who served there. Now we see one of these ingredients, 2,4-D, introduced because the DuPont company, Dow, we have an alphabet of agrochemical companies, but Dow is introducing a new genetically engineered corn plant that will, quote, be resistant to 2,4-D. The curious part about this, that we had to do some research to understand, and I don't even know if we still fully understand it, is that corn is naturally resistant to 2,4-D. That 2,4-D has been used as a corn herbicide, post-emergent herbicide, for decades. So why?
And this is legal?
And this is legal, perfectly legal. And even though we know that there are profound negative impacts to human health, and that this chemical residue ends up in our food system, ends up into our surface and water, ends up creating serious occupational exposures and risks for the people who produce our food. It's still licensed by the EPA and approved for use by the USDA on our food crops. But the curious part is, if corn is already resistant to 2,4-D, why are they introducing this genetically engineered cultivar? And the answer seems to be that there might be some incremental level of benefit, in that right now there are application windows, certain times during crop growth, that it would probably not kill the plant but stunt its growth. The restrictions on the spraying will be relieved. So if this takes off, if Dow can convince agronomists and extension services, extension agents, universities, where they spend a lot of money, and farmers, that this is a better seed with a potential for higher yields, we're going to see meteoric increases in the application of 2,4-D in our countryside. And here, Joe, is the real juxtaposition, in that when they brought out Roundup, it was billed as a safer alternative to the existing herbicides that were being widely used, including 2,4-D.
So, Mark, it's interesting that they're using this and targeting it for the corn, but I'm wondering if they're using it for other crops that,
Sure.
and if they do use it for other crops, would they have to be genetically engineered also, like the Roundup Ready variants from Monsanto are done to resist the glyphosate?
Okay. I can't claim to be an expert on herbicides. I believe it's licensed by the EPA for use on other crops. 2,4-D is a broadleaf herbicide, so it might very well be used on grassy areas. 2,4-D, incidentally, is readily available at your local Ace Hardware store and wherever you buy gardening products, including chemicals. It's a pretty ubiquitous chemical in our environment.
And did they have a name for it, like glyphosate is Roundup? Roundup is there a name?
No, I believe it's a generic
ingredient.
More than one manufacturer at this point. So
Okay.
it is involved. Basically look for what the active ingredients are in your home pesticides. Hopefully, none of your listeners and viewers are using home pesticides, because we know that they're not really needed. That if we practice careful cultural management, rotating our crops, mechanical weed control, which means a hoe in your garden, but it might mean a tractor and a cultivator in a farm field. Organic farmers obviously are legally prohibited from using toxic herbicides and other chemicals, and we grow wonderful corn.
Well, you can also inoculate the soil with bacteria, which is, well, through composting. We ferment vegetables to increase that bacteria in our own intestinal tract, but you can create literally millions of trillions of bacteria and inoculate the soil with it, which would vitalize the soil and help it to become resistant to all these types of threats that cause people to use the chemicals.
Yeah, that's a great point, Doctor, because just like the human body, we use probiotics. Organic farming depends on composts because we aren't using chemical fertilizers to feed the plants. Rather, we're concentrating on the tilth and the fertility of the soil. We're feeding the soil, and we're
Absolutely.
trying to create a beneficial environment for all the organisms that break down organic matter into nutrients. And so that's one of the reasons that when the USDA or Consumers Union, the publishers of Consumers Reports, measures the nutrient level in food, that organic food is superior. It's
Right.
not a coincidence.
Absolutely. So this 2,4-D, this Agent Orange, wasn't that originally developed by Monsanto, and then it went generic, and other people are
I
manufacturing it
believe
now?
there was more than one contractor in the war years, and I'm not unfortunately a historian, but the components, the key chemical components to Agent Orange, including 2,4-D, are available. They're not patented at this point,
Hmm.
and that's how Dow can get a hold of the technology. But you asked about other resistant
Hmm.
species of plants, and I assume that those are under a development. That just as there's a whole line of
Ah,
Roundup
that makes
Ready,
sense.
Roundup Ready corn, Roundup Ready soybeans, Roundup Ready alfalfa, Roundup Ready sugar beets. So the reason that these weeds are becoming resistant is that even if you rotate crops on your fields, you're not rotating the herbicide. You're using the same product. You as a physician know that if you used the same type of antibiotic time and time again on the same patient, or the same kind of antibacterial or antimicrobial chemicals in the hospital, that we would have a problem with resistance of pathogens. And so this is counterintuitive. We have a knowledge base. We know what's going to happen. They're doing it anyways because we're talking about looking at short-term profit and the next quarterly shareholders report. We're not talking about the long-term health of our Earth or its impact on our species.
Right. So it's massive, and it sounds like it's a potential threat, at least from what your perception is, that they can introduce this fatally flawed concept in yet another chemical that's potentially even more toxic than glyphosate. Although I've interviewed Dr. Don Huber, who's a phenomenal research scientist in this area, and he believes that the glyphosate is actually more dangerous than DDT. So because of its mechanism of action and how it affects systemic hormone actions, and really is so deadly to the soil bacteria, which is so essential for the soil health.
Yes,
So
I've read Dr. Huber's papers. I've read his letter to USDA Secretary Vilsack, and I've watched his very informative interview with you on your website. It should be required viewing for every conventional farmer in this country.
yeah,
We're soiling our own bed.
absolutely.
The Roundup chemicals are now not only in our food supply, not only in the soil, but it's in our groundwater, it's in our air, and most disturbingly, it's in our bloodstreams.
Yeah. So it's a definite challenge. So my guess is, I mean, there's a one we don't. My goal is never to be an alarmist, but to really inform people of what the current changes are, and then more importantly, or as an adjunct to that, is to give them solid recommendations as to what they can do with this information, and not just to live in fear. So my perception, and then I can run it by you and see if you would agree, would be this is just further reinforcement that things are getting worse, not better, and that we really need to be assiduous about seeking out certified organic foods, because they typically are free of this, and then also participate in the campaigns like the one we're mounting with several other uh, uh, organizations to actually require labeling and to label these foods, which would be the beginning of the end of the genetically modified or genetically engineered crops in the United States. So I'm wondering if you agree with that, or have any other recommendations that you can add to that.
I agree with that recommendation 100%, Dr. Mercola. Don't panic, go organic. There aren't that many things that we can totally take control over in terms of our health and our future health and the health of our offspring. But pure food and pure water is one of those. And we know that there have been peer-reviewed research that indicates a demonstrably lower level of any kind of contamination in organic food. And as I said, again, peer-reviewed literature that clearly illustrates its nutritional superiority. So on a micro basis, yes, we need to protect ourselves and our families, and it really contribute to the richness of quality of life, because organic food tastes better. And in terms of an investment, what could be a better investment than the health and well-being of your family? But yes, we should also become politically involved, because what's so insidious is that these novel genes permeate our environment. They can even contaminate organic food. We need to be activists. Right now, we have a petition on our website, which is cornucopia.org, cornucopia.org. If you click on the Action Alert button, we have a nice little letter to USDA Secretary Tom Vilsack and President of the United States, Barack Obama, saying that this is outrageous. They have opened the floodgates. We've seen no difference between the past Republican and this current Democratic administration. And yes, part of this petition is asking for labeling. The industry is vehemently resisting that because they know very well that given a choice, just like in Europe, where they do have a choice because of mandatory labeling, given a choice, consumers will not vote to subject their children to become, in essence, human guinea pigs, because there's been virtually no human health testing on any of these novel, genetically mutated life forms.
Yes. So there we have it. The new warning and the recommendations to even become more dedicated and committed to implementing these recommendations and strategies. So I thank you for joining us today, Mark, and updating us on this development in the ever-evolving story of the intention of these large corporate industries to sort of decimate our food supply at the benefit of their bottom line corporate profits.
It's my pleasure, and I think remember that we do have power because in our system of economics, our power is when we vote with our pocketbooks in the marketplace and at the grocery store and at the farmer's market. And if enough people vote the right way, we will influence the largest corporations that supply our food.